Producer Naoki Yoshida is now hinting at Final Fantasy XVI DLC. The latest installment of Square Enix's legendary JRPG franchise redefined many of the series' hallmarks with a darker plot and more action-focused gameplay. Commercially, Final Fantasy XVI sold over 3 million copies in its first week alone, and its launch has helped cement Final Fantasy as one of the highest-selling gaming franchises of all time. Like all Final Fantasy entries, one of FF16's strengths lies in its sprawling medieval setting and cast of memorable characters. As fallen nobleman Clive Rosefield seeks vengeance for the apparent death of his brother Joshua and finds a greater purpose in liberating Valisthea from the dark forces that corrupt it, players are introduced to many great supporting characters that would be ripe for a designated DLC campaign. However, Square Enix has remained tight-lipped on whether there will be any post-launch story content for Final Fantasy XVI. That is, until Final Fantasy XVI producer Naoki Yoshida hinted that players might see more of Valisthea after all. During the recent Final Fantasy XVI press tour in Malaysia, Yoshida stated that his team has been listening to feedback from players who would to experience more of the game's world and storyline through DLC. He didn't outright say that such content is in the works, but he expressed hope that Square Enix will be able to share more information when the time is right. Twitter user Itekimochi shared the clip of Yoshida discussing this, and even took the liberty of adding improved subtitles. Past Final Fantasy games like Final Fantasy XV and Final Fantasy VII Remake have already set the precedent for expanding their storylines through DLC, and some players are hopeful that FF16 can shed more light on instant fan favorites like Cid and Torgal. Final Fantasy XVI's time-skipping storyline also leaves plenty of room for players to explore more of Clive's life following the fall of Phoenix Gate and his time as the leader of Cid's underground resistance, and the game's hunt side quests would be prime for DLC support. These time skips leave the door open to explore more of Clive's life in a DLC story campaign, and the various allies and enemies he meets along his path of vengeance and redemption are just as viable for such post-launch content in the eyes of many fans. However, Square Enix has gone back and forth about whether Final Fantasy XVI will get any DLC. While the publisher previously stated that it has no plans for any further expansions to the main game, producer Naoki Yoshida recently suggested that Final Fantasy XVI DLC could be on the horizon thanks to the wave of positive fan feedback his team has received. Now Yoshida is hinting at which of Final Fantasy XVI's cast of rogues and anti-heroes could star in this hypothetical DLC, and his choice of Cid would likely be well received by fans. In a recent interview with Kakukapuri, Yoshida revealed that he would like to make a DLC story revolving around this outlaw. Yoshida says that Cid would be a great choice for a side plot due to his complex and mostly mysterious backstory, though he notes that this is just a personal preference and not necessarily what Creative Business Unit 3 is planning for the future of Final Fantasy XVI, if anything at all. Many Final Fantasy characters have bore the name Cid throughout the series, and Final Fantasy XVI's iteration has already become one of the most popular to date. A former soldier turned revolutionary leader, Cid is the dominant of the Thunder icon Rama and seeks to free the kingdoms of Valisthea, a cause that Clive and his friends take up as Final Fantasy XVI's plot carries on. Along the way, Cid broke traditional Final Fantasy conventions and won over players with his noble goals, charming and sarcastic personality, and strong voice acting from Game of Thrones and Harry Potter alumni Ralph Ineson. One complaint many players had with Final Fantasy XVI's plot is how little time they actually got to spend with Cid, a slight that could be corrected with DLC if Naoki Yoshida gets his way. Cid's largely unexplored backstory is ripe for further exploration, including his time in the Royal Wayloader Army and his complicated relationship with Final Fantasy XVI antagonist Benedicta Harmon. All of this and more could be the focus of Final Fantasy XVI's first DLC, and few fans would complain about seeing more of Cid in action. The possibilities are plenty for hypothetical Final Fantasy XVI DLC, and there might very well be more content on the horizon if Naoki Yoshida's recent words are anything to go by. Of course, Yoshida remains quite vague on what exactly developer Creative Business Unit 3 could be planning, so fans will likely have to stay vigilant for any further Final Fantasy XVI announcements if DLC is indeed in the cards for the latest Final Fantasy adventure. In response to recent reports, Square Enix said that it measured the success of Final Fantasy XVI relative to the installation base of the PS5 globally. According to the company, over 38 million PS5 units were sold as of March 31, 2023. As a result of PS5 sales being stifled by the COVID-19 pandemic, Final Fantasy XVI did not have the potential installation base that other titles such as Final Fantasy VII Remake had. Square Enix added that Final Fantasy XVI launched while the PS5 is still in its early lifespan, and stated that Final Fantasy VII Remake was released late into the PS4's cycle. Despite the comparatively smaller audience and the mature rating, Final Fantasy XVI still sold 3 million units in 1 week. This means that roughly 12% of all PS5 users have a copy of Final Fantasy XVI on their system. Due to the game's success and positive feedback, producer Naoki Yoshida said that the development team has considered the possibility of adding DLC to Final Fantasy XVI in the future. It remains to be seen if Yoshida and Square Enix will follow through with it. Final Fantasy XIV just revealed Dawntrail, its 5th expansion pack. This optimistic new chapter of the Final Fantasy XIV story takes players across the sea to a brand new adventure. During the keynote address for the first in-person fan festival in 4 years, Final Fantasy XIV director and producer Naoki Yoshida gave players a preview for this new expansion, including the new graphics update. This original chapter is being considered a fresh start for the Final Fantasy XIV main scenario after the epic conclusion of Endwalker. Dawntrail brings Final Fantasy XIV players to Turul, the continent far to the west of Eorzea that has only been known as the New World up until now. This mysterious land promises high adventure and discovery as they explore fantastical places like Tulialal, the fabled city of gold. This diverse land holds many peoples, including the Mamolja players have seen since the original Final Fantasy XIV. Turul takes heavy inspiration from South American cultures, and the expansion itself is being marketed as the ultimate summer vacation. That said, Final Fantasy XIV players should expect plenty of challenges to face in Dawntrail. One of the core conflicts involves a conflict over who will take over Tulialal after its current leader. Players will help decide this contest over the right of succession with the help of the science and familiar Final Fantasy XIV characters like the Gleaner Erenville, though their allies may end up divided on how to solve this conundrum. As they journey across Turul, players will encounter all sorts of cultures and peoples. Urukpacha is home to a clan of giants and the diminutive and mercantile Pulupulu both, while Yaktel is a center of population for both the Mamolja and the Hrothgar native to Turul. As always, plenty of fantastic trials, such as the legendary Valagarmanda, will await players in Dawntrail as they raise their jobs to the new level cap of 100. Players will also have 2 new jobs they can try, a melee DPS and a ranged caster. While Final Fantasy XIV has not revealed these jobs yet, the trailer features the Warrior of Light sporting a longsword and light armor, prompting many to expect a pirate-like swashbuckler class to be one of them. Yoshida also wore a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles shirt, which could suggest the melee class will use ninja gear, and the caster may be a green mage. Dawntrail is currently planned to release in summer of 2024. Players can expect to see more information about Dawntrail at Final Fantasy XIV's next fan festival in London on October 21st and 22nd. Final Fantasy XIV just showed off some incredible footage of the new graphics update coming in Dawntrail. This new upgrade is adding depth to models, textures, and graphical fidelity that will allow players to see Final Fantasy XIV in a whole new way. First introduced nearly 2 years ago, Final Fantasy XIV showed off the progress it was making on the graphical improvements. During the keynote address, director and producer Naoki Yoshida revealed side-by-side footage of the original and Dawntrail versions of the character models, gear, and environments. Metal shines and reflects light, faces are smooth and gorgeous, and grass and flowers are abundant, rich, and saturated with color. Last year, when Final Fantasy XIV first introduced the graphics update, it revealed a couple screenshots of the character models and environment changes it hoped to make. However, this new footage is leagues ahead of those early development images. It seems the new fidelity of Final Fantasy XIV will finally surpass that of the original 1.0 graphics, which had infamously poor optimization because of overly complicated models for games of that era. Of course, an increase in the graphical fidelity of Final Fantasy XIV brings with it an increase to the minimum and recommended system requirements for PC. Most computers should still be able to run the game, but players should make sure to get any required upgrades before Dawntrail releases next summer. The PS4 client will still work fine and will receive support for the foreseeable future. And the recently announced Xbox Series X and S version of Final Fantasy XIV will become available in spring before the expansion's release. Dawntrail itself looks like an exciting new chapter of Final Fantasy XIV. Marketed as the best summer vacation ever, Dawntrail breaks away from the serious tones of Endwalker to set the stage for an expansion full of exploration, adventure, and intrigue across Tural, the continent known to Eorzea as the New World. Dawntrail is far from the first time Final Fantasy XIV has started a new chapter. 2013 saw the game relaunch with Final Fantasy XIV, A Realm Reborn, which was, for all intents and purposes, a new game. It rebooted the title and is set in a rebirthed world following the events of the original release version. In 2017 the game dropped support for the PS3, and as a result, the Shadowbringers expansion was able to feature bigger zones and higher quality visuals. Dawntrail is set to be the next big step for the game, with a litany of new features and a fresh continent for players to explore. From the start, Endwalker was pushed as the conclusion of the first major arc of Final Fantasy XIV, the Hydaelyn and Zodiark saga. During the lead-up to Endwalker, the moon served as a main motif for the expansion, which referenced both the fall of Dalamud at the end of version 1.0 and the vastness of space. With the Paladin as the poster job and the addition of the moon-based Loprits to the game, Endwalker was considered a nostalgia trip in part for fans of the Final Fantasy franchise's fourth entry. As far as the story went, Zodiark's demise in the expansion's opening act allowed the Enzinger, the true main threat of Endwalker, to enact her plan to overrun Aetheres with dynamis. This energy fed on emotions such as hope and despair, and the latter turned people into monstrous blasphemies, which subsequently caused panic that bred even more monsters. Knowing about the Enzinger and the despair she wrought, Hydaelyn tested the warrior's resolve in a trial by combat. With her purpose fulfilled, Hydaelyn guided the Warrior of Light and the Scions of the Seventh Dawn to the edge of existence, where they defeated the Enzinger. Hope reigned over Aetheres once again. But, the subsequent patches of Endwalker's main story leaned further on the lunar references. At the time of writing, the current patch arc has taken the Warrior of Light and the Scions to the 13th Shard and its blood-red moon. With more nostalgic references to Final Fantasy IV on full display, patch 6.5 will take players to the lunar subterrane for a final clash with Zeramis, a dark entity named after FF4's final boss. Only time will tell how the battle will turn out. During the 2023 Las Vegas Fan Fest, Final Fantasy XIV producer and director Naoki Yoshida stated that the final major patch of Endwalker, titled Growing Light, will give players a clear idea of what will bridge the plot between Endwalker and Dawntrail. If Endwalker is symbolized by the moon and by nostalgia, Dawntrail is pictured by fresh beginnings and new adventures into uncharted territory. At first glance, the land of Tural, also called the New World, is a sun-kissed, tropical nation filled with vibrant and diverse cultures that have not been seen in Final Fantasy XIV before. Though information about Dawntrail is limited, the thought of figuring out what places are still left to discover on Aetheres has given Final Fantasy XIV players plenty to ponder. Given the fact that Endwalker was the finale of a saga between two godlike primals spanning years, Dawntrail will have some expectations ahead of it. The close of one story will allow the Final Fantasy XIV development team to try and experiment with new story ideas and give players fresh new experiences with each content update. Suffice it to say, the sky is the limit for the future of Final Fantasy XIV and for its players. Final Fantasy XIV kicked off the second day of the 2023 Las Vegas Fan Fest by revealing a small taste of what players can expect in the patched 6.5 content update. The final major update for Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker will be split into two parts, and game producer and director Naoki Yoshida explained what players can expect to see in each half of the update. Final Fantasy XIV's patch 6.5 update will be called Growing Light and split into two parts. The first part will be released in early October 2023, which will include a new main story dungeon and trial that Final Fantasy IV fans will recognize. The current main story plot will take players back to the 13th Shard as they dive into the lunar subterrane dungeon, which shares a name with the final dungeon of Final Fantasy IV. After clearing the dungeon, the Warrior of Light will face Zeramis, one of the most recognizable villains in Final Fantasy history, in the Abyssal Fracture trial. Yoshida also revealed that the final alliance raid of the Myths of the Realm series, Thalia, would be included in patch 6.5. In addition, the free trial of Final Fantasy XIV would be expanded to include the Stormblood expansion once the 6.5 content update arrives. This will also add Stormblood's final 3 dungeons to the duty support system, which will allow free trial players to experience plenty of main story content for free. Only time will tell if the expanded free trial will also include access to optional Stormblood content such as the Unending Coils of Bahamut, Ultimate, Raid and the Great Hunt trial that was featured as a crossover with Monster Hunter World. However, Final Fantasy XIV players will have to wait until patch 6.55 for the conclusion of the main story of Growing Light, as well as content such as relic upgrades and the Fall Guys crossover in the Gold Saucer. Between the 6.5 patch series and the upcoming Dawntrail expansion, Final Fantasy XIV players will have a plethora of content to do soon. Final Fantasy XIV is expanding its free trial to include everything up to the Stormblood expansion. This means players can try out up to 3 massive JRPGs worth of Final Fantasy XIV content before ever having to purchase the game. However, this already generous free trial is about to get even better. During the first Final Fantasy XIV Fan Festival in Las Vegas, director and producer Naoki Yoshida announced that Stormblood was being added to the free trial. This means players can raise their jobs to level 70, unlock the Red Mage and Samurai classes, and progress through the story leading up to Shadowbringers for free. A Realm Reborn and the Heaven's Ward expansion alone contain hundreds of hours of content, with each one providing a full RPG's worth of things to do. Final Fantasy XIV already had one of the most robust free trials for a subscription MMO beforehand. With the addition of Stormblood, players who try it out will have plenty of time to get hooked before they need to subscribe to the game. Final Fantasy XIV is expanding the duty support system to include every duty leading up to the Shadowbringers expansion. Once this feature is added in the next update, the story of Final Fantasy XIV will be almost completely soloable. The director behind the long-running MMORPG, Final Fantasy XIV, states how many more expansions will be coming after Dawntrail's release. The highly successful MMO has been a huge hit for Square Enix, where it has been running ever since 2013, with it getting nearly a whole decade of support now. This is thanks to its producer and director, Naoki Yoshida, and he and his team have been immensely communicative with his audience and player base about what to expect for Final Fantasy XIV. This includes the expansions that have been added to the game over the years. In an interview between the director and Famitsu, with translation courtesy of Itekimochi on Twitter, the interviewer noted how the end of the Endwalker expansion essentially closed out the story that had started back in 2013. Yoshida was then asked how far he had planned the story since Dawntrail would be a brand new story in the grand scheme of things. While he couldn't divulge any details, he stated that he has at least 2 more expansions currently in his mind after Dawntrail. He also notes that he'll be 51 years old when that expansion releases, and wants to release at least 3 more expansions by the time he reaches 60, laughing at the possibility as well. In terms of the story's length after Dawntrail, he notes that the team didn't plan on creating the game with an interconnected story leading to Endwalker. But they wanted to tie up all the loose ends with the story, so they scattered hints throughout the expansions before they reached a point they could wrap things up. Yoshida states that they are doing the same thing for the story come the 7.0 update, with its length and size being dependent on the audience's reaction to the story. Speaking of Final Fantasy XIV, the director of Square Enix's Final Fantasy XIV has recently shared his thoughts on creating an anime or television series based on the MMORPG. Given how long the MMO has been around, it is not surprising for the community to be interested in finding out whether the development team is still looking to expand Final Fantasy XIV more, beyond the realm of video games. As reported by Japanese gaming publication Famitsu, the director of Final Fantasy XIV, Naoki Yoshida, talked about the possibility of creating an animated or television series based on the MMORPG in a joint interview. Yoshida revealed that he is open to the idea and would possibly like to do so. However, given the many positions Yoshida is holding within Square Enix, he does not think it is possible to undertake the task for the time being. Fans will probably remember that aside from being the director of FF14, he is the head of Creative Business Unit 3, which is responsible for Final Fantasy XVI, as well as part of the company's Final Fantasy Committee. Fortunately, it seems Yoshida is not completely closing doors to a possible Final Fantasy XIV anime or TV series, stating that the MMORPG has not denied any requests yet. In fact, he shares that they already have inquiries about such a project. However, he currently does not seem to have any plans to push through with it, but reassures the fans that, if and when he does, Square Enix will deliver something of solid quality. Players will likely recall that a Korean animated commercial for Final Fantasy XIV was released some time ago, and this indicates the type of quality the game's team will probably deliver when they finally decide to make an anime or television series. Until then, fans will have to be satisfied with the already confirmed upcoming Final Fantasy XIV content the devs are promising to implement. A well-known Persona leaker shares more details regarding Atlus' current plans, which include possible remakes of the first 2 games in the series. This reliable leaker has been providing information to fans in recent months, giving insight into current projects in development at the Japanese developer. She had confirmed the existence of Persona 3 Reload and Persona 5 Tactica before their debuts at the Xbox Games Show, along with providing information regarding Persona 6. This leaker has come forward again to clarify some details about what she posted. Known as MBKKSSTBHZ5 on Twitter, aka Midori, she had been sharing information with fans about the long-rumored sequel, such as the possible release window for Persona 6, along with other spin-off projects in the pipeline. According to her apparent connection at Atlus, Persona 6 is the main focus at the company, with all the games currently in development building up to its announcement and release. After this information was shared, Midori took the time to answer and clarify some details regarding what she had said. Midori states that Atlus plans change frequently due to a variety of factors, but more spin-off games that use the previous Persona games in them are possible. The reason, according to her, is that Atlus wishes to make these spin-offs once Persona 6 comes out, as it will make it easier to expand upon the 6th game and also provide a reason to revisit these older titles. This reinforces her previous leak regarding the 6th game, where each project will be building towards the game's release possibly in 2026. Fans believe that the original Persona and Persona 2 duology desperately needs a remake for the modern era. Not only are both games difficult to come by, but one of the re-releases of the duology was never brought over outside of Japan. Due to their obscurity, they are rarely acknowledged by gamers outside the hardcore Persona fans. With Atlus apparently developing a game that will incorporate these early characters, it might be best to have a remake of their games too. Given that the Persona series is originally a spin-off of the larger Shin Megami Tensei franchise, the original games feel much closer to their classic parent series than the modern entries. These first 2 entries feel a lot more stripped down in terms of features when compared to their modern counterparts, missing elements like a calendar system and social links. Instead, the games take a more bare-bones approach to gameplay with staple Shin Megami Tensei mechanics like demon fusion and multiple rows of enemies in combat, the latter being a feature not present from Persona 3 onward. Although these games feature series tropes like high school students unlocking the ability to summon personas from within their subconscious, they have an overall feel that is a far cry from what newer fans of the series might be used to. This puts Atlus in the difficult decision of whether to remain wholly faithful to the original games and risk turning off newer Persona fans with more archaic gameplay, or completely overhauling the games to include modern features and risk alienating fans of the original style of gameplay. Both of these options present potentially controversial scenarios, meaning Atlus has a difficult choice ahead of them if they move forward with these remakes. The design philosophy for Persona 3 Reload seems to be remaining faithful to the original games as much as possible, but reworking areas that need improvement. Updated combat mechanics, improved social links, and new voice actors are all changes between the original game and Persona 3 Reload, with potentially more yet to be revealed. However, Atlus has a much easier time translating modern mechanics to Persona 3 Reload without removing the feel of the original, since it's already a very similar game to its sequels and established many of the common features the series would go on to be known for. On the other hand, it would be a lot of work to completely overhaul the first 2 Persona games to fit more in line with the post-Persona 3 titles. Simply keeping the gameplay the same but updating the graphics is certainly an option, but Atlus has already released updated versions of the original Persona games on the PSP in the past. However, even these remastered versions are rapidly aging, showing just how much Persona 1 and 2 are in need of remakes, regardless of if they remain faithful to the originals or take on a more modernized look and feel. When Persona 3 Reload was announced, it made a tremendous amount of sense. Persona 3 was in many ways the foundation of the franchise as players know it today. Given the massive popularity of Persona 5 and the attention it brought to the series, bringing older entries up to modern consoles felt like a no-brainer. Persona 4 Golden, while less known than 5, was already beloved, and it also made sense to simply port it to more systems. While remakes of Revelations Persona and the Persona 2 duology are highly requested, remaking them would prove a greater challenge than Persona 3 Reload. Persona found its humble beginnings as a franchise in the mid-90s as a spin-off to the Megami Tensei series. Revelations, Persona has a lot more in common with mainline Shin Megami Tensei games than it does modern Persona titles, and similar things can be said about Persona 2. The popular social simulation mechanics weren't really fleshed out until the third entry of the franchise and only came to be what fans now expect from the series in 4. Furthermore, the earliest titles in the series are much darker tonally and in presentation. While they focus on young people confronting a warped reality, not much else remains the same in modern Persona games. While remakes of the early Persona titles are often requested by fans, what they would actually be like is a massive mystery. These initial titles feature different gameplay systems, lack social simulation mechanics, have wildly different art styles, and lack the influence of the early to mid-2000s Mo boom that permeated Japanese otaku culture around the launches of Persona 3 and 4. While modern Persona games are equally about hanging out with the party and defeating antagonists, previous entries were much more serious. The big question around a remake of these games is how faithful would they be? A fully faithful remake of Revelations, Persona or the Persona 2 duology would likely go against the taste of modern Persona fans. On the other hand, taking Persona 2, a title that features Hitler as an antagonist, and adding cozy slice-of-life anime tropes to it would cheapen the tonal seriousness of the original. Persona 2 especially raises questions about how the adaptation would work since it was originally released as 2 separate titles with different protagonists. Remaking the first 2 Persona games would be a challenge, but a worthwhile one. Remakes of the first 2 Persona games, in order to please new and old fans, would likely have to split the difference between old school and modern Persona. An ideal remake of these first 2 titles would likely hold on to the horror aesthetic that influenced them and their more serious tones. Social links could be added to flesh out characters, but dialogue would have to remain more serious than the social interactions in later entries. The remakes could borrow from Persona 5's genre-defining combat system and incorporate unique elements that pay homage to the combat of the original releases. However, the art style would need to be more in line with the original titles. By splitting the difference between classic and modern Persona titles, and using the framework of modern Persona to tell a much darker story, Atlus will be able to please most of the fan base. If Persona 3 Reload performs well, these remakes will become more likely than ever, and leaks already suggest that Atlus may remake Persona and Persona 2. How the company handles Persona 3 Reload may provide some insights into how remakes of the first 2 titles could play out. Regardless of how it happens, Revelations Persona and the Persona 2 duology deserve to be available on modern platforms and more accessible to fans of the series. Current President of Sega Yukio Tsujino is interested in some of the company's classic IPs, including Sonic the Hedgehog, getting more reboots and remakes in the future. The Sonic franchise is one of the company's most iconic names in gaming, with 2023 looking to be a bright year for the Blue Hedgehog. The same cannot be said of most of its other IPs, though in recent years has seen some love being thrown its way. This can be seen with re-releases like the Virtua Fighter 5 Ultimate Showdown remake in 2021 and Samba de Amigo Party Central. The latter game in particular is part of a rather dormant Sega franchise which hasn't seen a new release since 2007. The Niche Rhythm series had been regulated to crossover appearances and remasters, with little chance of seeing a new game. With Samba de Amigo is making a comeback on Nintendo Switch in 2023, Sega President Yukio Tsujino comments on the possibilities of more games in the same vein. This was brought up during an interview between Tsujino and Japanese magazine Famitsu, where after the interviewer referred to Samba de Amigo Party Central as a reboot. Tsujino corrected him and stated that he considers it a new game in the series. Tsujino then stated that Sega takes reboots and remakes into account when planning out what to do with the company's current IPs, singling out Sonic the Hedgehog specifically. He states that since the franchise is the company's signature IP, alongside developing new games, it is considering making reboots and remakes for the franchise. Sugino then discussed the upcoming Sonic Superstars co-op platformer, stating that since it's also a new game, he would like to implement reboot-like measures, too. The president also expressed his excitement over the upcoming release, where he seemed rather hopeful of the game's return to classic 2D gameplay, along with the implementation of co-op multiplayer. When Sugino was asked what impressed him about Sega's previous fiscal year, he pointed towards the strong 2022 that Sonic had. Specific examples included the critical and financial success of the second theatrical movie, along with the mostly positive reception and sales success that Sonic Frontiers has been seeing, even stating that the game exceeded his sales expectations. He also stated that he was happy to receive the positive comments from gamers in the West, where he believes that Sonic the Hedgehog is also heading in the right direction. Sega President Yukio Sugino comments on the possibility of developing a miniature console based on the classic Sega Saturn machine. In the last few years, gaming companies have been producing ways for fans to play retro games, with one of the more popular trends being the production of miniature consoles preloaded with classic games. Nintendo's NES and SNES mini consoles were attractive pieces of gaming hardware that Sega followed up with its own series of retro mini consoles, the Sega Mega Drive Genesis Mini. Sega released these miniature consoles in two waves, with the Sega Genesis Mini 1 and Sega Genesis Mini 2. First iteration contained 42 emulated games, while the second included more games that also had overlap with the Sega CD's library. Shortly after the mini console's release in 2022, Sega asked fans what mini console they'd like to see next, based on an online questionnaire included with each purchase. These questions included the possibility of developing a Sega Saturn and Dreamcast Mini, two of the most recognizable consoles in Sega's history. When the possibility was brought up to current Sega president Yukio Sugino, he commented on how difficult it might be to make one. In an interview with Famitsu, with translation courtesy of VGC, the Sega president commented the main issue of adapting the Sega Saturn to a mini console is due to the hardware itself. The Sega Saturn is historically a console that was a high-performance machine, where it had more raw power than the PS1, though its hardware was also incredibly complex. Sugino commented that they would consider it once they're in a position where the company can openly develop it together with gamers who love the Sega Saturn and Dreamcast. Back in 2022, Sega classic hardware producer Yosuke Okunari acknowledged the same desire for fans wanting a mini console for these two classic consoles. However, Okunari also commented that producing a Sega Saturn and Dreamcast Mini was unlikely, due to the costs of producing the miniature hardware being too expensive. Recreating the boards and miniaturizing them for production would be costly, and emulation on current boards was also incredibly difficult. The COVID-19 pandemic also was a contributing factor in the costs to produce these boards, due to the complex architecture of both consoles. Despite the console's failure, the Sega Saturn's library of games was filled with some hidden gems that have been trapped on the machine. These include the well-regarded Panzer Dragoon Saga, which hasn't gotten a re-release. For the time being though, it seems unlikely that a Sega Saturn mini console will be coming out anytime soon. Speaking of Sega and its consoles, a recent Sega of America leak from way back in 1996 reveals that the company believed that its 1995 console, the Sega Saturn, was handily winning the console wars over Sony's original PlayStation. Ultimately, Sega would stop making consoles after the market failure of both the Saturn and its 1999 follow-up, the Dreamcast. Sega has been out of the console game for a while now. The company announced back in 2001 that it would only be focusing on its software moving forward in light of its multiple recent hardware failures between the Dreamcast, the Saturn, and also handhelds like the Game Gear and Nomad. Apparently, though, that's not what Sega thought at first. A recently leaked document from the company shows a surprising amount of confidence in the Saturn in its fight against Sony's behemoth console debut, the PlayStation. The leaked document is a massive 272-page PDF that began circulating around the internet recently. It reveals a lot of information about Sega and the Saturn at the time, including sales, email correspondence, and the poor retail margins that many stores were having to deal with. The strangest detail of the leak is some of the talk about how well the Sega Saturn was doing in comparison to the PlayStation. An email from Tom Kalinske, former CEO of Sega of America, to other major Sega execs at the time reads, "We are killing Sony. In every store, Saturn hardware is sold out and there are stacks of PlayStation. Kalinske then asks the email group how best that success can be shown at E3 so that more people would grow confident in the Saturn's eventual success in the US. That success in the US never came, of course. The most liberal estimate of Sega Saturn sales comes in at around 17 million units sold. The PlayStation 1 is estimated to have sold more than 102 million units worldwide. Sony's console remained in production until 2006, a full 5 years after the Saturn successor the Sega Dreamcast went out of production. If there was ever a case for legitimate competition between the Saturn and the PlayStation, the retrospective sales numbers certainly put it to bed. Tom Kalinske ultimately resigned from Sega following the failure of the Saturn. His time as CEO saw the company become a juggernaut in the industry, and virtually the only competition to Nintendo during its SNES days. There's been a lot of drama and discussion about the failure of the Saturn in the years since, as it effectively marked the beginning of Sega's fall from video game hardware stardom. And this new document leak gives adamant fans and historians a surprising amount of new details to study and consider. From Software lead composer Yuka Kitamura has left the famous Japanese developer following a lengthy stint at the company. Kitamura worked at From Software for the past 12 years, with the studio's first game to feature one of her soundtracks being the 2013 Armored Core Verdict Day. After co-authoring the OST of the latest Armored Core game with Kota Hoshino, Kitamura teamed up with Dark Souls composer Motoi Sakuraba on the soundtrack for Dark Souls 2. She later served as the lead composer on Bloodborne, Dark Souls 3, and Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice. The Dark Souls composer later returned to create the Elden Ring OST together with Tsukasa Sato, Shoi Miyazawa, Tai Tomisawa, and Yoshimi Kudo. That lengthy spell at From Software has now come to an end, as revealed by Kitamura herself. The 33-year-old took to Twitter on August 1st to announce her departure from the Tokyo-based developer, adding that she has decided to start working as a freelance composer moving forward. Her departure could potentially be a big loss for the studio, as Kitamura was largely or solely responsible for authoring what are widely considered some of the best RPG soundtracks in recent memory. While she wasn't the lead composer on From Software's most recently released game, Kitamura still authored some of Elden Ring's best boss music, including Melnia, Blade of Miquella. Kitamura's From Software departure doesn't rule out the possibility of her continuing to compose original soundtracks for the studio's future titles, not least because she has outright stated that she's looking to continue her gaming industry streak. "I would like to continue to express myself in game music," the artist wrote on Twitter. Kitamura's most recent contributions to From Software games are likely yet to be heard. Namely, the artist has long been a member of Frequency, the studio's internal band making music for the Armored Core series. Kitamura was the sole violinist of the group, which also includes some other From Software veterans such as Kota Hoshino, Tsukasa Sato, and Koichi Swanaga. While the Japanese company has yet to confirm that, it's plausible that Frequency has once again been in charge of putting together a score for Armored Core 6 Fires of Rubicon. The game's full track list will be revealed no later than August 25th, when the next installment in the long-running vehicular combat series is scheduled to hit the market. The timing of Kitamura's departure from the company also seems to suggest that she was involved in the creation of the game's OST until the end of development. The collector's edition of Armored Core 6 will ship with a digital soundtrack, From Software confirmed back in May. The developer of the Callisto Protocol, Striking Distance Studios, has recently laid off 32 employees, including some senior staff. Founded in 2019, Striking Distance Studios released the Callisto Protocol at the end of 2022 as its first game. With the project being led by Glenn Schofield, the co-creator of the Dead Space series, hopes were high among many gamers for the studio's inaugural release. Unfortunately, the game's reception was mixed. Further, its release came shortly before the remake of Dead Space, which was very similar in terms of themes and gameplay. In general, fans felt that the Callisto Protocol was less impressive than Dead Space, the game it drew inspiration from. As a result, Striking Distance Studios was faced with a commercial and critical flop for its debut. Now, less than a year after the release of the Callisto Protocol, Striking Distance Studios has confirmed that it has laid off 32 employees. First revealed publicly when Twitter user Timur222 revealed posts from LinkedIn, the studio has since offered more details and an explanation for the decision. It seems that the studio, as well as Krafton, the holding company which owns it, made the choice in order to realign the studio's priorities to better position its current and future projects for success. There's currently no complete list of what positions have been cut, but at least some senior staff have been impacted. One senior environment artist at the studio has since posted on LinkedIn, announcing his layoff and search for a new job. While the company is framing the decision as a move that will set it up for future accomplishments, it's difficult to not see this as a worrying sign. After the poor reception of the last game, many felt that fans shouldn't hold their breath for a Callisto Protocol sequel. This news could be a cause for more pessimism. Since the disappointing launch of the Callisto Protocol, Striking Distance Studios has failed to turn things around. The final transmission DLC for the Callisto Protocol was controversial, and the studio has not done anything since to reassure fans or win back their support. Given this recent history, it's not surprising to see the studio beginning layoffs. While Krafton has announced it's opening a new AAA studio, its subsidiary appears to be struggling. Whether Striking Distance Studios bounces back and releases a new title or begins a decline leading to closure remains to be seen. Gamers and fans of horror will want to keep an eye out for future developments. Embracer Group has quietly shut down Campfire Cabal, which was open for less than a year. It was one of the many studios under Embracer Group's ownership and is part of a massive restructuring announced in June. Based in Karlstad, Sweden and founded by Lars Wingefors, Embracer Group has become a rising star among gaming companies. Owning several notable and acclaimed video game developers including Gearbox Studios, THQ Nordic, Crystal Dynamics and Eidos Montreal. As a result, it also makes millions off of popular video game IPs such as the recent Marvel games, Lord of the Rings, Deus Ex, Tomb Raider and Legacy of Kain. The company has even branched into multimedia thanks to its purchase of Dark Horse Comics. Recently, the company attempted a $2 billion deal that ultimately fell through, resulting in several studio closures, game cancellations, and employee layoffs. As first reported by LinkedIn user Bruno Christian Bellabou, a former executive producer at Campfire Cabal. The studio, a subsidiary of THQ Nordic, was shut down as part of the massive restructuring process. It's not the first time Embracer Group has made a major cut like this, following its shutdown of various mobile games that came with its multiple industry conquests. But it should prove devastating for anyone involved in the closure, especially given how quietly it occurred and Embracer Group's hesitation to release any statements on the matter. Campfire Cabal was a very short-lived studio that only opened its doors in September 2022 and never got to produce any software. It was founded by Jonas Waver, who previously created and developed the tactical RPG Expeditions Rome at Logic Artists, also owned by THQ Nordic. Waver also acted as the creative director for Campfire Cabal, which was tasked with future Expedition sequels following the acquisition by Embracer Group, but ultimately and unfortunately, no such sequels came to be, leaving the franchise trapped in limbo for the moment. Embracer will be shuttering game studio Campfire Cabal nearly a year after its establishment. The decision was attributed to the games firm's restructuring of its business operations. Campfire Cabal said, "This decision was not related to the work we've been doing at the studio but was made from a purely financial standpoint. We want to make it clear that our management and the rest of the team have not given up on Campfire Cabal yet, and neither have our friends at THQ Nordic. We are still pursuing our options for finding a good resolution to this situation, and THQ Nordic has been very supportive throughout this difficult time." Campfire Cabal also said it has encouraged staff to seek new roles. It said, "We don't want anyone to have to consider the needs of our company over their own." In June, Embracer announced a restructuring program that would include shuttering studios. In an open letter, CEO Lars Wingefors said, "Embracer currently engages close to 17,000 people, and while that number will be lower by the end of the year, it is too early to give an exact forecast on this." When contacting THQ Nordic about the studio closure, a representative said, "There was nothing to be shared with the public. It's always disappointing to see game studios get shut down, especially before they get a chance to show the world their true potential. It hurts the workers, it hurts the franchises, and it hurts the gaming community who are now robbed of said franchises. One can only hope that Campfire Cabal's former employees can find success in the industry moving forward." Microsoft has just added a selection of replacement parts for certain Xbox controllers to its online store, offering new opportunities for DIY enthusiasts to repair their devices. This move is the latest in a series of concessions to consumers who would like the ability to repair their Microsoft products at home. Back in June, the company announced that it would begin selling replacement parts for various Microsoft Surface devices, in an effort to make DIY repairs of these products easier and more accessible for consumers. Passionate fans have always been able to create incredible DIY projects out of gaming hardware, but having custom-made official replacement parts available on the Microsoft Store makes the process much more accessible for less tech-savvy consumers. Today, without issuing an official announcement, Microsoft added several new replacement parts to its online store, this time for the Xbox Wireless and Elite Series 2 controllers. The new offerings include simple components like buttons and outer cases, as well as some electronics like input PCBA boards and motor assembly parts. These products are being made available only days after the announcement of ambitious new features coming to Xbox controllers, although there is no evidence of a direct link between the two. Accompanying the new replacement parts on the Microsoft Store are a handful of disclaimers. One of these advises customers that the DIY parts should only be used on products whose normal warranties have expired, while another cautions that repairs with these components require moderate technical skill and are suited for enthusiasts, professionals, or those with prior experience in electronic disassembly. These and other thorough disclaimers are meant to provide the company with a legal shield against any complaints or lawsuits. The program is currently live for Xbox users in North America, as confirmed by Xbox Insider Program lead Brad Rossetti on social media. Consumers can now fix individual problems with standard and Elite Series 2 wireless controllers, including replaceable analog sticks, buttons, triggers, and a printed circuit board assembly. Replacement parts can be purchased on Microsoft's Xbox Repair and Replacement Parts website, where users can download a service guide intended for technically inclined individuals with the knowledge, experience, and tools required to repair Microsoft devices. Tutorial videos can be found on the Xbox Support YouTube channel. First-party repair kits for Xbox controllers can also be found on the How To website iFixit, which has the parts listed with a lifetime guarantee, while Microsoft's parts only have warranty for a year, as spotted by The Verge. iFixit also sells the tools required to carry out repairs. The right to repair one's own electronics has been a hot topic in recent years, with more and more consumers and activists calling for products that are easier and safer to fix at home. Microsoft's decision to offer replacement parts for its Xbox controllers and other products likely indicates the company's eagerness to appease this movement. This move comes alongside efforts to bring more beloved games to the Xbox, as well as other ongoing attempts by Microsoft to innovate and improve its products and services to increase the value of its brand. If the company continues this trend by releasing replacement parts for more Microsoft products in the future, it will surely earn itself considerable goodwill among the DIY community. If a new leak is to be believed, Sony may be releasing a Pro version of its PlayStation 5 console in November 2024. Last generation saw both Sony and Microsoft release mid-gen upgrades for both of their respective consoles with the PS4 Pro and Xbox One X. While it doesn't seem like an Xbox Series X console upgrade is happening, at least not yet, it seems Sony may be working on an upgrade for the PlayStation 5. This is far from the first time that rumors have spread about Sony releasing a new PS5 console. It's long been rumored that a PS5 Slim console is in development, though it has yet to be announced. While the PS5 Slim console may or may not exist, holdouts may want to wait for Sony to introduce the PlayStation 5 Pro console instead. According to a report by Key to Gaming, PS5 Pro console is codenamed Trinity and is actively been demoed for developers, with development kits being sent out by late November 2023. The report states that the PS5 Pro console will have 30 WGP and 18,000 MTS memory with consistent FPS at 4K resolution and the ability to display in 8K resolution. Their sources believe that this new PS5 console is currently planned for release in November 2024. It is also supposed to be improving the ray tracing much better. While it's totally possible that Sony is planning to release an upgraded PS5 console in November 2024, it's also possible that plans will change, and it will ultimately decide against doing so. That being said, Sony has released new versions of its consoles every single generation, and so it would be more surprising if a new PS5 didn't release at some point. Currently, there are two different PS5 models available to consumers. One is the standard $500 PS5 that includes a disk drive, while the other is the $400 variant that is exactly the same spec-wise, but lacks a disk drive. There have been reports of a new PS5 model including a detachable disk drive as well, but fans will have to wait and see what happens. Sony has not announced any new PS5 models yet, so those who are itching to get one for big games like Spider-Man 2 or other upcoming PS5 exclusives may want to take the plunge now instead of waiting for the potential redesigns. I think a PS5 Pro makes sense, because when games in the near future move towards full current gen, especially for Unreal Engine 5 games and Grand Theft Auto 6, it could be possible GTA 6 could be only 30 FPS on the base PS5, so a PS5 Pro option for the frame rate lovers will be a nice option in my opinion. Speaking of the PS5, the PlayStation 5 is outpacing its Xbox competitors in sales, even as it trails behind its immediate predecessor. Sony's latest console had something of a slow start when it first launched in 2020, thanks in no small part to supply shortages brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic. Once these shortages finally ended, sales for the current-gen PlayStation console picked up at a steady pace, with recent reports revealing that 2023 has been the most profitable year for the PS5 so far. In addition to the console itself being more readily available in comparison to the past couple of years, the PlayStation 5's strong sales figures have been bolstered by a strong slate of first-party games like God of War Ragnarok, GT7, Miles Morales, Final Fantasy XVI and Horizon Forbidden West. The upcoming launch of Marvel's Spider-Man 2 could lead to even more PS5 sales in the final quarter of the year, but the console has already crossed some major milestones in the meantime. Sony recently announced that it has sold 40 million PlayStation 5 consoles as of July 16. As reported by IGN, Ampere's Piers Harding-Rolls says that the PS5 has crossed this sales threshold at a slower rate than the PlayStation 4 did, and that the new system is still trailing behind its predecessor by about 1 million units. By comparison, PlayStation 4, the fastest-selling PlayStation console to 40 million, achieved the same feat 2 months quicker. Still, reports indicate that the PS5 is outselling Microsoft's Xbox Series X and S by roughly 2-to-1 due to recent claims that Microsoft's consoles have reached over 21 million users since their launch in 2020. The milestone follows a strong June for PS5 across Europe, with sales up 116% compared with the same period in 2022. As part of the announcement, PlayStation also revealed that there are now 2,500 PS5 games available on the platform. Sony announced it had hit 30 million sales for PS5 in January. Still, current statistics indicate that the PlayStation 5 is selling at double the rate of its Xbox competitors, which is a promising sign for Sony and a troubling omen for Microsoft. Sony has released its financial results for the 3 months ended June 30, 2023, with its movie business driving income down, but PlayStation's good performance driving sales growth. Sales were up 33% to 2.96 trillion yen, $20.6 billion, net income down 17% to 217 billion yen, $1.51 billion, particularly game and network services sales are up 27% to 771 billion yen, $5.38 billion. Sony's increased sales for the quarter were partly attributed to a significant increase in sales within its game and network services segment, while the income decrease was attributed to a decline in its financial services and pictures segments. Looking at GNNS more closely, Sony said the growth was due to increase in sales for third-party titles and hardware, as well as an impact from foreign exchange rates. Looking at software sales, they were up 27% year-on-year to 406 billion yen, $2.83 billion, representing 56.5 million copies shifted across PlayStation consoles. First-party titles represented 6.6 million units out of this total. Digital software sales represented 153 billion yen, $1.07 billion, during this Q1, a 28% rise, while physical titles were up almost 26% to 24 billion yen, $167 million. Meanwhile, hardware sales were up 42% to 186 billion yen, $1.30 billion. The PS5 shifted 3.3 million units during Q1, bringing its total to date to 41.7 million. Earlier this year, Sony said it planned to sell 25 million PS5 units by the end of the fiscal year. As reported by Reuters, Sony said sales have been weaker than expected so far this year, with President Hiroki Totoki adding during the presentation, We believe that there is ample possibility for us to catch up. Looking ahead, Sony expects its sales for the fiscal year to reach 12.2 trillion yen, $85 billion. The forecast is up 6% compared to the one from April and would represent an 11% rise compared to FY22. However, its net income is expected to be down 14% year-on-year to 860 billion yen, just shy of $6 billion. The forecast in Sony's game segment was revised upwards though, with the company now expecting sales to reach 4.17 trillion yen, $29.1 billion, a 14% increase over the previous fiscal year. The operating income forecast for GNNS remained identical, with the company expecting 270 billion yen, $188 billion, a 8% growth year-on-year. Sony explained that operating income is expected to remain unchanged from the April forecast mainly due to the impact of the above-mentioned increase in sales of non-first-party titles and an expected decrease in costs, substantially offset primarily by a deterioration in profitability of PlayStation 5 hardware mainly due to changes in promotions by geographic region and the sales channel mix, as well as the impact of changes in the launch dates of a portion of first-party titles. That state of affairs is unlikely to change for a while yet. Not least because Sony has ostensibly delayed some first-party titles that were originally targeting releases in the second half of its fiscal year 2023, which runs until March 31, 2024. The company's latest financial report indicates as much, noting that Sony decided on some changes in the launch dates of a portion of first-party titles previously planned to debut during this period. No specific titles were name-dropped in the report, although Sony did say that it doesn't anticipate these changes will meaningfully impact its annual revenue forecast. That expectation suggests the postponements did not reach its biggest upcoming PlayStation exclusives like Marvel's Spider-Man 2, which is scheduled to hit the market on October 20th. As for what games the company could be referring to, one potential candidate is the PS5 exclusive Stellar Blade. That action-adventure was originally announced in 2019, with Sony eventually buying its exclusivity rights from South Korean studio Shift Up 2 years later. The PlayStation maker announced that Stellar Blade will be out in 2023 last September, but seeing how the game is still without a release date, it's plausible that its launch could slip into 2024. Also, Helldivers 2 doesn't have a release date yet, so that could be another one. It could be PlayStation is counting on Marvel's Spider-Man 2 for the rest of the year. During June, US consumer spending on games hit $4.7 billion, a 9% increase year-over-year, according to the newest Circana data. Software reached $4 billion during the month, as the segment was up 7% compared to last year's performance. Consumer spending on gaming hardware saw a 22% year-on-year bump as it amassed $454 million. Year-to-date hardware spending remains 23% higher when compared to the same period in 2022, at $2.6 billion. Circana said, "This is the highest video game hardware spend for a June month since the $617 million reached in June 2008. Sony's PlayStation 5 console was the top-selling system for unit and dollar sales during June. The report adds that the system remains in the lead units and dollar sales performance for the 2023 hardware market. Video game hardware spending increased 22% versus YA, to $454 million. This is the highest video game hardware spend for a June month since the $617 million reached in June 2008. Double-digit percentage growth in PlayStation 5 spending offset declines in spending on Xbox Series and Switch. Consumer spending on PlayStation hardware reached its highest June total since 2008, while unit sales were the highest achieved since June 2010. Accessory spending was up 14% year-on-year, totaling $214 million for the month. The PlayStation 5 DualSense Edge wireless controller Black was the top-selling peripheral of the year in dollar sales. The month saw a number of new franchise installments hitting the top-selling sales chart. Blizzard's Diablo 4 debuted as June's best-selling game. Square Enix's newest RPG release Final Fantasy XVI took second, while Capcom's latest fighter Street Fighter VI was the third top seller. After the showcase of Marvel's Spider-Man 2, Marvel's Spider-Man 1 and Miles Morales jumped on the charts to 9 and 10 respectively. Spider-Man marketing is going insane now, and along with the Across the Spider-Verse movie has really enticed more people to buy the prequels, and single-player games dominating the charts makes me really happy. Other PlayStation titles on the charts include God of War Ragnarok and The Last of Us Part 1 for the year-to-date bestsellers for June. Hogwarts Legacy is still the best-selling game of 2023 in the US despite facing tough competition from new releases in long-running franchises. Hogwarts Legacy also ended up being a massive commercial success, as it sold over 12 million units within the first 2 weeks of its release. Figures from May confirm that Hogwarts Legacy has sold over 15 million copies and has generated over $1 billion in revenue, and fans can find the game still showing up in sales charts months after release. Now, new information reveals that Hogwarts Legacy is the best-selling title of 2023 in the US so far, even though some massive games have been released this year. This means that Hogwarts Legacy has managed to shrug off competition from new releases in popular franchises like The Legend of Zelda, Resident Evil, and Diablo. It might even become the best-selling game of the year, even end up outselling Zelda, Call of Duty and Spider-Man 2. Nintendo's new hardware is reportedly on pace to launch in the second half of next year. The system's release schedule news comes from VGC, who spoke with persons familiar with the matter. Citing its own sources, Eurogamer reports that launch window also aligns with their predictions. The console will reportedly still be usable as a portable device such as the Nintendo Switch. It will possess an LCD screen and accept physical games via a cartridge slot. Then they'll release a OLED version to finesse the customers later, and they'll get away with that cause no major publications will complain. Developer kits for the Switch successor were also given to studio partners, VGC said. It's unknown if the new system will be backward compatible. In June, Nintendo president Shuntaro Furukawa said that the platform holder wanted to transition consumers to the next console, which was taken by some as a hint toward backward compatibility. In the transition from the Nintendo Switch to the next generation console, we would like to make sure that customers can smoothly transition while still utilizing their Nintendo accounts, he said. Reliable insider Jeff Grubb recently addressed the rumors surrounding Nintendo's eventual follow-up to the Switch. Speculation about the next Nintendo console has spread across the internet over the past couple of years, with many believing that the Japanese gaming powerhouse is shifting focus toward its development. Indeed, while the Nintendo Switch has become one of the highest-selling consoles of all time, it is now 6 years old, and many are anxious for fresh hardware. Jeff Grubb recently addressed the latest Nintendo console rumors on the most recent episode of his YouTube podcast show Last of the Nintendogs. He noted that the claims of the console coming out in late 2024 line up with reports he's heard about Nintendo announcing its new hardware at some point this summer. Aside from the new Nintendo console's supposed announcement and release date, fans and insiders have speculated on the hardware and software specifications of this rumored system, and how it will build on the console/handheld hybrid formula that made the Switch a household name. Other rumors suggest that big-name studios have already received development kits for this currently code-named NX2 console and are already working on launch titles for it. Another big question about this hardware is the availability of backwards compatibility, which will suck if it is not. Nintendo has released its financial results for the 3 months ended June 30, 2023, therefore including the release of The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Unsurprisingly, the Japanese company has had a very successful quarter, but hasn't revised its forecast upwards for the full year. Net sales was 461 billion yen, $3.22 billion, up 50% year-on-year, and operating profit 185 billion yen, $1.29 billion, up 82.4% year-on-year. Nintendo Switch hardware sales reaches 3.91 million units, up 13.9%, reaching 129.5 million units in lifetime sales, and software sales reached 52.21 million units, up 26.1%, reaching 1.09 billion units in lifetime sales. Nintendo has had success across the board during its Q1 for FY 2024, with Zelda Tears of the Kingdom selling 18.51 million units as of June 30th, which is massive. The title released on May 12th, and Breath of the Wild reached 30.65 million units. Sales across its video game platform business segment, which includes hardware, software both physical and digital, and accessories, was up 44.6% year-on-year, reaching 427 billion yen, $2.99 billion. The Super Mario Bros. Movie also contributed to Nintendo's good performance during the quarter, with the company saying it positively impacted sales of Mario-related titles. That included Mario Kart 8 Deluxe selling an additional 1.67 million copies during the quarter, bringing its lifetime total to 55.46 million units sold. But that also included its mobile segment, with Nintendo saying that the combination of high level of audience engagement with the film as well as increased income from royalties helped drive its mobile and IP-related business segment to 31.8 billion yen, $222 million, in sales, a 190.1% rise year-on-year. The Super Mario Bros. Movie has been seen by over 168 million people worldwide as of July 30th, Nintendo said, with box office revenue reaching $1.34 billion as of July 26th. That makes it the highest ever for an original film based on a video game, and the second highest for an animated film, the firm said. Looking at hardware, the Nintendo Switch sold 3.91 million units during the quarter, a 13.9% increase year-on-year, with the OLED model representing the wide majority of the sales, 2.83 million. Meanwhile, software sales were up 26.1% over Q1 FY 2023 to 52.21 million units. Looking at its digital performances, the platform holder noted good sales of downloadable versions of packaged software for Nintendo Switch and increased sales related to Nintendo Switch Online, which led to digital sales growing 35.9% year-on-year to 119 billion yen, $832 million. Looking ahead, Nintendo expects the full financial year ending March 31, 2024 to reach 1.45 trillion yen, $10.1 billion, in sales, which would represent a 9.5% dip over the previous year. This was unchanged from the forecast announced back in May 2023 when it published its full-year result for FY 2023. The platform holder highlighted its intention to keep focusing on the Nintendo Switch, despite rumors of new hardware earlier this week. For hardware, by continuing to convey the appeal of Nintendo Switch, we try not only to put one system in every home, but several in every home, or even one for every person, Nintendo said. Another objective is to continually release new offerings so more consumers keep playing Nintendo Switch even longer and we can maximize hardware sales. As part of this strategy, Nintendo mentioned the recent release of Pikmin 4 and the upcoming launches of Super Mario Bros. Wonder, Super Mario RPG, as well as Pokémon Scarlet and Violet DLC. Other software publishers also plan to release a wide variety of titles, and we will work to invigorate the platform by supplementing existing titles with a continuous stream of new titles and add-on content, Nintendo added. Sega Sammy posted strong Q1 revenue, despite sales of new games being lower than expected. The overall business released its results for the 3 months ending June 30th, with sales up 63% year-on-year to 108 billion yen, $756.9 million. Operating income rose 712% to 22.5 billion yen, $123 million. This is primarily due to the recovery of the company's pachinko and pasha slot machines business after COVID-19, with sales up 385% year-on-year. In terms of the video games division, Sega posted a slight drop in game sales, down 3%, while operating income dropped 45%. The firm says that new titles, plus repeat sales of older games, were below expectations and cited the post-COVID drop-off as the reason. The new games that were released during the quarter were Etrian Odyssey Origins Collection and Sonic Origins Plus, which have together sold 740,000 units. In terms of legacy games, Sega sold 4.87 million games, which is a drop on the 5.12 million in the financial first quarter last year. Despite the performance, Sega expects to deliver games growth of 9% during the full financial year. This is due to a strong release slate during the next 9 months, including Persona 5 Tactics, Total War Pharaoh, Like a Dragon Gaiden, Hyenas, and Sonic Superstars. The company is expected to complete its acquisition of Rovio next week. Electronic Arts reported its first quarter results, posting gains across the business as its sports offerings were boosted by a slate of 5 new releases. For the 3 months ended June 30, 2023, revenue was $1.92 billion, up 9% year-on-year, and net income was $402 million, up 29% year-on-year. EA's fiscal year is off to a strong start as the publisher posted record Q1 net bookings and saw gains across all its key performance metrics. EA delivered a record Q1, driven by strong momentum in EA Sports Global Football and Star Wars Jedi Survivor, EA CEO Andrew Wilson said. The FIFA franchise posted its best-ever Q1 net bookings. EA didn't give details about Jedi Survivor's performance, but did call it a commercial success with millions of players to date. It also said players are spending more time with the game than they did its predecessor, 2019 Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. EA's full game sales and live services revenues were also both up year-over-year. The first quarter saw EA launch 5 major titles: Star Wars Jedi Survivor, PGA Tour, Lord of the Rings Heroes of Middle-earth, Super Mega Baseball 4, and F1 23. The current quarter will see EA launch Madden NFL 24, EA Sports FC 24, and Immortals of Avium, while the third quarter has NHL 24 confirmed for it. UFC 5 and an unannounced racing title are also expected at some point this fiscal year. Looking ahead, the company reiterated its full-year guidance of $7.3 billion to $7.7 billion for both bookings and revenue. Unity has released its financial results for the 3 months that ended June 30, 2023, and saw revenues grow significantly thanks in large part to the numbers reflecting the addition of ironSource to the business last November. Here's what you need to know for the firm's Q2 performance. Revenue was $533 million, up 80% year-on-year, and net loss $193 million, compared to $204 million last year. Unity noted its Q2 2023 exceeded the revenue guidance it previously shared of $510 million to $520 million. Core subscription services drove revenue growth for Create Solutions, Unity's business division that includes its games engine and strategic partnerships. This quarter, Create Solutions delivered significant innovation and business model enhancements across our product lines. We continue to reduce our reliance on professional services as we build a scalable and profitable business, said the letter. The firm also noted that industries beyond games represent 30% of its Create Solutions earnings. Unity also said that it will be shifting its business operations for the division. It said, "We made the decision to be less professional service-centric and increase our focus on subscription and consumption models to scale a profitable business, leveraging our partnerships such as Capgemini and Booz Allen." Given that our strategic partnership quarterly revenue is impacted by the timing of large deals, we are also providing our Create Solutions revenue excluding strategic partnerships, which was $170 million, up 17% year-over-year, the report read. Regarding its Grow Solutions sector, the engine maker said that it improved its use of AI technology implementation. Among the programs mentioned, it highlighted June's reveal of AI tools Unity Muse and Unity Sentis. Unity has not posted a net profit to date, although it has been reporting positive EBITDA since last year's fourth quarter, and the second quarter saw that figure continue to grow. The report projects that Q3 2023 will generate revenue of $540 million to $550 million, a 67% to 70% increase year-on-year. Unity added, "For the year, we are taking into account our good first-half execution balanced against an ongoing uncertain economic environment." Final Fantasy creator Square Enix released its financial earnings for the 3 months ended June 30, 2023. Net sales were 85.6 billion yen, $602 million, up 14% year-on-year, and profit was 6.3 billion yen, $44.3 million, down 66% year-on-year. The HD game subsection generated 29 billion yen, $204 million, in net sales, an increase of 142% compared to last year. Firm attributed the revenue bump to the 2 additions to its Final Fantasy game offerings, one of them being Final Fantasy Pixel Master. But Square Enix's biggest HD games release of the period was Final Fantasy XVI, which launched on June 22. As of June 29, the title had sold 3 million copies. Mobile and PC browser games amassed 22.3 billion yen, $157 million, a decrease of 18% year-over-year. The segment only saw one release with the launch of free-to-play Dragon Quest Champions. Square Enix currently has 19 games identified as major operating titles for the division. During the quarter, Square Enix MMOs made 11 billion yen, $77.3 million, in revenue, representing a drop of 22% year-over-year. The segment's performance was due to decreasing sales for Final Fantasy XIV and Dragon Quest X, Square Enix said. The publisher's earnings revealed that it sold 7.54 million game copies across its portfolio during Q1 FY 2024, a 76% growth year-over-year. In its forecast, Square Enix announced that it expects net sales of 360 billion yen, $2.5 billion, for the fiscal year ending in March 2024, which would represent a 4.9% rise year-on-year. The firm noted that it has multiple titles in its release pipeline. Dragon Quest Infinity Strash, based on the adventure of Dai, is due out in September. Star Ocean: The Second Story will be released in November, and Dragon Quest Monsters: The Dark Prince game is poised to release in December. Meanwhile, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, the second remake installment, is planned for an early 2024 launch. In the most recent Square Enix earnings report, Takashi Kiryu was forced to explain why the company's operating profit dropped 79%, from 14.4 billion yen to just 3.0 billion yen. The answer is that Square Enix expensed the full cost of Final Fantasy XVI's development in its first financial quarter. All future sales are expected to be profits, but in the meantime, the development costs of the game have had an impact on the company's numbers. Considering those massive boss fights, the budget does seem quite high, maybe $150 million. Last week, Konami published its financials for the 3 months ended June 30, 2023, with the Japanese company's revenue on a par with last year, but its game segment dipping. Revenue was 72.6 billion yen, $510 million, up 1% year-on-year. Business profit was 17.2 billion yen, $121 million, up 21.7% year-on-year. After FI 2023 sales being mostly flat for its digital entertainment segment, Konami has not managed to reverse the trend quite yet. However, the firm noted that eFootball 2023 continued to sustain strong performance, and while overall revenue in its game segment was down, its business profit for the category was up 13% to 15.1 billion yen, $106 million. Looking at Konami's other business segments, its gaming and systems vertical performed well during Q1 FI 2024, with revenue up 29.9% year-on-year, reaching 10 billion yen, $70 million. Looking ahead, Konami named the launch of the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Volume 1, due in October, and the development of Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater, announced at the PlayStation Showcase 2023, as highlights of its upcoming projects. The Metal Gear series has now topped 60 million sales across all titles, VG Charts reported yesterday. For its forecast for the fiscal year ending in March 2024, Konami expects its revenue to reach 328 billion yen, $2.3 billion, a 4.4% increase over FI 2023. Take-Two Interactive today reported its financial results for the quarter ended June 30th. The company continued to post significant losses, but the top-line growth of recent quarters has slowed down due to the acquisition of Zynga closing partway through the year-ago quarter, making for more difficult comparisons going forward. Net revenue up 17% to $1.28 billion. Take-Two's earnings report this quarter looks a lot like the last few, with significant gains in revenue and bookings paired with significant losses. That's been the pattern ever since Take-Two's acquisition of Zynga closed during the first quarter of its previous fiscal year. But now that the combined Take-Two/Zynga is no longer being compared against the performance of Take-Two on its own, that top-line growth has started to slow. One part of the business that still posted eye-catching growth was recurrent consumer spending, with net bookings in the virtual currency/DLC/in-game ads catch-all category growing 38% year-over-year. Take-Two has put a lot of emphasis on growing its recurrent consumer spending over the years. Take-Two CEO Strauss Zelnick in an earnings briefing whether that was due more to increasing the number of players paying for add-ons, or if that was due to a similar cohort of paying players significantly increasing how much they spend on add-ons. It could be either mathematically, but our goal is to reach the broadest audience we can and serve them as effectively as we can, Zelnick says. As for the continued losses, Take-Two has cautioned investors that it expects to finish the current year at least $500 million in the red, but it has also given them something to look forward to with an $8 billion net bookings forecast for fiscal 2025, which many have taken to mean that Grand Theft Auto 6 will debut during that year, even if the company isn't confirming that. We continue to believe that we are positioning our business for a significant inflection point in fiscal 2025 that will culminate in us delivering new record levels of operating performance next year and beyond, the company said in releasing its results. For the last several years, we have been preparing our business to release an incredibly robust pipeline of projects that we believe will take our company to even greater levels of success. It feels that way, but it's early days, Zelnick says. On the console side, we're seeing some return to strength. The mobile side is still challenged. That's either slightly down or flat depending on how you look at it. I do believe we're in the fastest growing part of the entertainment business and will be in that place for the next 20 years or so. Obviously to be down in 22, as the industry was very surprising and disappointing. I would say it's early to declare victory, but not too early to say that we see some green shoots. In the meantime, Take-Two continues to move along, reporting net bookings on the high end of its forecast thanks to the usual suspects like NBA 2K23, Grand Theft Auto Online and Grand Theft Auto V, its hyper-casual mobile portfolio. Empires & Puzzles, Toon Blast, Merge Dragons, Words with Friends, Red Dead Redemption 2 and Red Dead Online, and Toy Blast. One game that wasn't mentioned as a bookings driver was new release LEGO 2K Drive. Zelnick seemed optimistic about the game's longer-term potential. "It's early days still," he said. "I think it's a title that will sell over a long period of time because it's a great title." LEGO 2K Drive was released in May, less than 2 months after the game was announced. We asked about the trade-offs of short gaps from reveal to release, and what games might be better served by such a strategy than a slower build-up to launch. "People's attention is pretty thoroughly divided these days and you want your title to be front of mind," Zelnick said. "Depending on the title, we could have a much longer window between announcement and release. But in certain instances you want to surprise people with an announcement, do a bunch of marketing and then go to market. It's more art than it is science." During the quarter, Grand Theft Auto V added another 5 million to its units shipped total, which now stands at 185 million copies, and June saw more Grand Theft Auto Online players than any pre-pandemic June managed. Grand Theft Auto V will mark its 10th anniversary later this quarter. Red Dead Redemption 2 added another 2 million to its shipment total, and now stands at 55 million shipped since its 2018 release. NBA 2K23 has shipped 13 million copies, up 11% over its predecessor's performance to this point, and now sitting as the NBA 2K game with the second best sell-through ever, behind only NBA 2K20. And that's all for the video guys. Like and share the video for a greater audience. Comment your thoughts on the topics and donations are always appreciated. Subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon, and until then from SMPV, it's goodbye.